Singularity.
You see, we have our crystal ball installed. That's always good. We're trying to get the future to show up somewhat ahead of its regularly scheduled arrival. So when you saw the extraordinary yo-yo artist, Mr. Black, this morning, how many of you thought that was fundamentally about creativity? Show of hands. And how many of you thought it was fundamentally about discipline? Show of hands. Okay, so, and how many of you refused to vote just because you don't want to actually interact with me? Because hardly anybody voted. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fusion of design and business and how that actually informs the modern rate of change. When I saw the extraordinary performance by Mr. Black, what I was watching was exceptional discipline. While he did a beautiful job of interpreting the video behind him, he could simply not have done 95, 98, 99% of what he did had he not practiced those routines some 10,000 times or more. Similarly with Ataka-san, Dr. Ataka gave us an extraordinary exposure to the reasons why artificial intelligence and the pace of change are accelerating. Again, a question, and I really want an answer this time, please. How many of you, is this your first attempt to understand exponential change through Singularity University? How many of you, this is your first? That's overwhelmingly most of you. This is my 18th opportunity to teach about exponential change and to do so in a way that is deep and thoughtful. And what I will make you a promise about, those of you that were here yesterday, those of you that have already gotten an impression from Dr. Ataka about the pace of change, and those of you that will continue to experience exponential insights over the next 24 hours or so, you will be overwhelmed. What you will experience by the end of the time here at the conference, Singularity University Japan Summit, is a sense that you are simply not paying enough attention to the rate of change in the world. This is not a public service. You're going to feel bad about yourself. You're going to feel like you've been somehow remiss. And I actually don't want you to feel that way. Innovation never comes from people that are fearful. It does come from people that are in trouble, but not fearful. And learning to be brave and bold, even in a time of extraordinary change, is what great innovators do. When you are careening down a road at very high speed and you can't tell what's around the corner, it can be terrifying. And by the end of the brief time that I have with you, I'd like to give you confidence, curiosity, and courage, which are the real extraordinary gifts you can bring to a time of exceptional change. Curiosity, confidence, and courage. So I want to talk to you about how Japan can once again reassert its global leadership, a leadership that you have enjoyed from time to time in recent history, and which you can enjoy again if you embrace this idea of changing your rate of change. So I have to be rude one more time and try to ask for an opinion. And again, I urge you to give me an opinion with a show of hands. How many of you think the world we live in is changing faster than Japan as a nation is changing internally? Okay, the world changing faster? Japan keeping up and being one of the leaders. Okay, overwhelmingly in this room, most of you feel like the world is changing faster than your beloved nation. This extraordinary place, this island nation that has learned how to build one of the world's most impressive sets of capabilities over and over and over again. The perception in this room is that the world is changing faster than Japan is catching up from behind. Here's why that matters. That condition has never occurred in history without some kind of significant disruption. Dr. Ataka did a good job of showing us the patterns of change elsewhere in the world. And I'm now going to describe for you the reasons why that is the case and what you can do about it in very practical terms. Now let me start with a little piece of poetry. This gentleman, Kenji Akwan, one of the most famous designers in the history of Japan, started life as a Buddhist monk, lived in Hiroshima, and learned how to deal with adversity. But through the years, he invented some of the most iconic things in your nation. This bottle, this beautiful motorcycle, and of course, the Narita Express. And he was a close friend of this man, Jay Doblin, who was the guy who taught me when I had more hair, okay? And Jay Doblin and I were friends of your great designer, Kenji Akwan. When I first came here in 1983, I had just been made president of Doblin, and embarrassingly, Kenji Akwan put on a huge dinner for me with 60 guests and me. And I showed up looking like this, and everybody was embarrassed. They thought maybe they made a mistake. They'd gotten things wrong. They didn't think somebody this young could be the president of Doblin, an organization that they loved. So the translators very politely went all around the 65 tables, because I was sitting here and Kenji Akwan was sitting next to me, but they had to ask the question all the way around till somebody came and asked me, "And you are president of Doblin?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And then everybody relaxed because they thought they'd made an enormous mistake. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because I want you to have a sense of how deeply, emotionally, I respect the history of design and innovation in this region of the world. I want you to know that it is grounded in love, and it is grounded in deep understanding of how you have innovated your way through adversity over a long period of time. This was the man that taught me. He was the founder or the creative head of all three of the three largest design firms in history, and we've together founded the last and final business called Doblin, now part of Deloitte, which is specifically trying to figure out how to make innovation a science instead of a random accident, which is why it's so important that we understand the yo-yo experience as one of discipline, not creativity. Yes, there's creativity involved, but it's about 2% of what he did. More than 95% of it was discipline. I wrote a book about that topic. I know nobody reads books. Yes, it has been translated into Japanese. You can find the Japanese version of it on Amazon, but this is not a sales pitch. This is my attempt to tell you that there is a science of innovation that makes it dramatically more successful when you learn how to address it. But right away, I want to telegraph to you that there's a pattern of innovation here in Japan that I'd like the leaders in the room to actively try to reinvent. The pattern of innovation in Japan, sort of epitomized by your great industrial giant firms, is focused predominantly on engineering excellence and technological advances. This is the way in which most Japanese people think about innovation. They think about it as technology and capabilities made huge in an industrial company. And that's great when you see it in the hands of something like Mitsubishi and its carbon fiber work. It's truly beautiful. It's truly technologically advanced. And it is the basis for many, many tens of billions, hundreds of billions of yen of revenues in the future. So it still works, but as we learned from Dr. Ataka, it is not the best way or the only way to innovate in modern times. Now, elsewhere in the world, they don't have the same faith that Japan has in technology, heavy R&D science, engineering excellence, and industrial scale. Elsewhere in the world, people tend to think of innovation as about creativity. They think it comes from geniuses and gadflies and rocket scientists and kids just trying to make things in their garages, or people everywhere in the world fueled on illicit drugs that we don't allow people to take at Deloitte, and I assume you're not allowed to take in your companies either. Okay? And what I'm here to tell you about, very briefly, two things. I want you to understand that innovation, when you act like a scientist and you ask what gets it to work instead of fail, is confounded by two mistakes that people make over and over and over again. First off, there is a noun form. There's the question of what are we trying to invent? What are we trying to create? What problem are we trying to solve? That's what will we do? And the second thing is a verb form. How will we do it? What will we make? How will we do it? Most innovation teams only think about the first problem. They think almost not at all about the second problem. What will we make? How will we make it? And oh, by the way, this is important, even when they think about what we're going to make, the little box we put the problem in, they get that wrong more than 90% of the time. So they work on the wrong problem. They don't even ask the question, how will we solve it? And working on the wrong problem with the wrong methods gets poor outcomes nearly every time, which is why all around the world, when a team tries to innovate, they fail about 96 or 97% of the time to solve the problem, even the problem they were trying to solve in the first place. That's the problem I worked on as a scientist with a team of brilliant colleagues for 35 years. And I have only a few minutes to distill for you the most important, highest level lessons of what helps you to get innovation to succeed instead of fail. My goal is to do this for you as a gift, to do it so that every team, every project, every company represented in this room can start to create bolder innovations that are easier for you to implement and harder for others to copy. Bolder, easier to implement, harder to copy. Those are the keys to getting innovation that creates really big breakthroughs. And to do that properly, you have to be logical, smart, and insightful about how you're going to solve both problems. What's the thing we're going to work on? How will we get that to occur in a way that's interesting and different and likely to change the rate of change even as Japan tackles bolder challenges going forward? And I apologize for speaking in American, and I apologize to the translators for speaking too fast, okay? But I will do whatever I can to try to make this as simple and accessible for you. As a favor, I have already posted the slides for you on a secure website. I will reveal unto you at the tail end how you can get those slides so that we're not being coy about the information. But let me break it down into the two pieces I promised. First, innovating in the right ways. This is the verb form. How are you actually going to do it? And then second, innovating on the valuable problems, okay? Now let me start with a little story. This is the story of Airbnb, extremely popular here in Japan. Some of you may even discover that you've got a room in your house that is turned into a form of income just because you can allow people to use it on Airbnb. Well, it's an important and a surprising story. It's only been around since 2008, but in the last few years, it's managed to figure out how to manage 2.3 million rooms around the world. That makes it larger than the three largest global hotel chains combined. And its cost of development of those 2.3 million rooms is $0. So how do you build the world's largest hotel chain without having any hotel rooms is a really interesting thing. Notice how it's both problems that I described to you. What are they trying to do? Very different. How are they trying to do it? Very different too. Let's talk about how they're trying to do it. So here I'm going to show you the tech stack that makes Airbnb function. There are 20 tools that they have just extracted from the world and licensed the chance to use that are about applications and data. There are 16 what are called development operations tools or DevOps tools. There are 13 utilities that allow them to do transactions and record keeping and privacy and all that sort of thing. And there are 8 business tools. Now, When you talk to a young person today, anywhere in the world, about how they build things, what you will discover is that literally all of the switched-on young people start by working through something like StackShare to try to figure out, where am I going to get that piece of data? What function am I going to do to it? And how will I get it to rise up and do something magical that the world has never seen before? These are the 57 capabilities that make Airbnb Airbnb. And the question is, which of them could you not start using this afternoon? Okay? If you want to build your own Airbnb-like thing to share and use anything in the world, you can use every one of these capabilities, except for these. There's one application and data tool. There's 2 DevOps tools. There's only 3 utility tools, and there's only 1 business tool not completely available to you this afternoon. And by the way, if you're worried about those few, tiny handful of capabilities, you don't really need any of those either. You can work around every one of those with something that is open source, freely available, and licensable. And why that matters is because when you use something that's already being licensed by somebody else, you won't get sued by patent trolls as you build it. And so that means 7 out of 57 applications that make Airbnb do what it tries to do each and every day are slightly proprietary. This is one of the most important messages I'm going to give you today. The idea that whatever you can imagine, you can build. And you don't have to build the things that make it work. They already exist. You simply have to combine them and use them. This is how people build software today. GitHub is an enormous repository with 14 million users and 35 million archives of things people have already figured out how to do. It's the largest source code host in the world. If there's something you're trying to do, trust me, somebody's already done it before you, maybe in a different industry, and learn how to do that. Hadoop is the way you get an open source code ecosystem for anything that involves large data sets. When you look at a good leader like Meg Whitman, what she says is, we built our open architecture on OpenStack so we could leverage the community of users that came before her. And she says, now we can do in a week what we couldn't do in the old days in a year. And when I talk about the old days, I mean the year before last. Ladies and gentlemen, very few even good leaders seem to know that this is one of the biggest revolutions that will make the ideas you're learning about here at the Singularity Summit in Japan practical and achievable, not just frightening. This is how you get bold with innovation, not terrified about what you'll imagine to be slow pace of change. You all know this already. You're familiar with this. This is the appification of the world, right? I mean, we all have these devices, and it's literally true that there's more than 1.5 million apps for these devices. And when you see them all and you stitch them together, nobody needs that many. Nobody needs 1.5 million apps. So we select the ones that we hear are interesting, and we put them in our devices. And from that point forward, the devices manage them, including all their little problems and all their crashes. All the software developers in the world get reports every day. The way to understand that is it's a radical change in the nature of the world to the place where modern platforms are asset light, fast, smart, distributed, open, rated, and porous. Of all those things, you can do every single one of them in Japan pretty easily. The one you generally don't do as well as you could is porousness. You'll need to learn to play nice with the other children and to do whatever you can to encourage diversity and involvement in the creation of ecosystems. Now, this is the important discovery that my scientists and teams have been able to pioneer over a long period of time. How did we get this discovery? We gathered up 1,200 innovations that had changed the world. Innovations that were sometimes very old, like the Model T Ford, and sometimes, at the time, pretty new, like Cirque du Soleil circuses, the first time people did circuses with no animal acts. And we were trying to figure out if they had anything in common, these innovations that changed the world over a 200-year slice of history. And because we were comparing things that were so wildly different from one another, our assumption is that they would have almost nothing in common. But when we use the right clustering techniques and pattern recognition techniques in computers, 19 years ago, we discovered to our enormous surprise that there is now and always has been a structure to breakthroughs. Now, color in my organization, Doblin, is never random and never decorative. So the colors actually matter. This stuff here in blue, it's taught in business schools. This stuff here in the gold in the middle, it's taught in engineering schools. And the stuff here in red on the right-hand side is taught in design schools and social science schools. Patrick introduced me as a person trying to fuse together the best forms of sophisticated business thinking, the best forms of sophisticated engineering thinking, and the best forms of sophisticated design thinking. This is what it takes now to get modern innovation to occur. And here's why this matters to you. In Japan, very generally, most companies over-index on what we call the middle of the model. You think that innovation is about technology and engineering. When you look at anything that really matters in the world, the way in which Google functions, or Amazon, or all of the fastest growing companies that Dr. Ataka shared with us, what you're discovering is that they really are about experiences, and they really do get paid in new and different ways. And that's the breakthrough insight that you need to embrace. When you learn to use the right methods that cause you to think this way, then what you'll get is simple. You're going to get bolder ideas because of the business plan. You're going to get them to be easier to implement because you'll know what the technology needs to do and you'll find cheap and fast ways to do it. And you will make sure that they're harder to copy because people will love them and you can get the momentum that you need in serving people well. Bolder ideas, easier to implement, harder to copy. That is the genetic code of a breakthrough. And this is the discovery that we have been perfecting over decades. We have redone the base analysis every other year for 21 years now, okay? And what's interesting is this has turned into a bunch of tools, but for you, I want to just give you the rule of thumb. It's incredibly important, very simple. If you want to create something with the power to change the world, when you try to innovate, instead of just thinking about the elegant engineering capabilities, you have to think about at least 5 of these types of innovation and all 3 colors. So you have to have business model innovations and engineering innovations and experience innovations for it to work really well. So what I've shared with you is a discovery. Now what I'll share with you is the tools that actually matter. And because our time is short, I'm not going to teach about these tools in detail. A modern, advanced innovator, someone with a master's degree or a doctorate degree in innovation sciences, will be familiar with up to 70 tools of innovation effectiveness. And what I'm doing for you now is sneezing onto the screen here the 10 that matter the most for companies of scale, okay? So if you're running a big company, or hope to be someday, it's important to know that you need some tools that help you think about the problem itself, because most teams get that wrong. If you're trying to teach your people to be more innovative, you have to have some consistent and systematic way to teach it, measure it, define it, and scale it. You probably need to have some way of diagnosing what your company is good at and not so good at. You need to have an authoring system that is better than brainstorming, which is a disastrously poor tool. You need to do some places in the world where you can try your pilot tests. You need to have ways of managing your portfolio, ways of making your innovation cheaper and lighter and easier to address. And you probably need a good war room, and you probably need a really good way to incentivize your senior executives. Those are the things that matter, ladies and gentlemen. those 10 among the 70 best tools are the ones that make a real difference. And let me explain why. Most people don't know any of these things and use none of them, okay? And they get very poor success rates. Global average across all industries and all geographies is about a 4% success rate or 4.5% success rate. That same list of things I just showed you, put in a different structure, says that the very basics, the most fundamental building blocks are these kinds of things. Want to get a little better than that? Identify some themes about how the world is changing and identify the things that will help you to create scalable platforms, make those cheap, and understand how the world is changing in which your industry or company lives. At the top, what you want to do is create incentives and metrics and rewards throughout your firm, especially, and this is important in Japan, senior executives, the most revered, the ones with the greatest longevity, they need to sponsor breakthrough growth businesses, but young people can be the authors of those breakthrough growth businesses. And here's why this matters. When you do none of this stuff, as I said a moment ago, your success rate will be less than 5%. If you just do the stuff at the bottom, you'll get a 7x improvement in basic success rates. And when I talk about a success rate, I mean how many out of every 100 initiatives that you fund will return the cost of capital. If you can get a 35% success rate instead of a 5% success rate, you'll look like a genius. Add the stuff in the middle, you'll get to a 50% success rate on average. And what that means is you've created an invention machine. You're no longer guessing when your innovation will succeed. About half of them will succeed. Add the stuff at the top, you can get a success rate approaching 70%. This, ladies and gentlemen, is my evidence that at exactly the time we need it, a time in exponential change because of connectedness and digital systems, we, normal human beings, not geniuses, not rocket scientists, not Nobel Prize winners, we too can be good innovators if we learn to do it in the ways that actually work. Now that's how to innovate. Let's talk next about what to focus on. Second little gift I'm trying to give you. Most people start in the wrong place and don't solve the problems that actually matter. This is a pretty epic problem, right? If you're working on the wrong thing, even if you're working on it with good tools, you're not going to get a good outcome. So what I like to say to good young innovators or the leaders of companies and governments that need them to succeed is that you need to focus on the right things. When I was a kid, that's what platforms consisted of. Now in modern life, this is what platforms consist of. This is the difference in Dr. Ataka's slides between the companies that were big but didn't grow very fast and the companies that grew very fast. The ones that leverage connectedness, the ones that leverage the way the world actually functions. These are the most popular consumer platforms in the world. Again, show of hands, how many use at least 3 of these a day? Show of hands. At least 3 per day. Everybody in the room. The least valuable is worth about $1 billion US, and the most valuable on this slide is worth well over $40 billion US. And these are the most valuable business-to-business platforms in the world. The least valuable is worth about $10 billion US, and they range to well over $400 billion US, dollars, not yen. Okay? Those are enormous numbers. What the world wants is things that connect in a digital world and make it easier to do hard things. Now, what Japan tends to do is to focus on technologies. What Japan tends to overlook is changes in the business model and changes in the experience model that radically alter the way in which human beings enjoy something. Airbnb, since I gave you that as an illustration in the first half, let me explain now what they're actually doing as a business. They're using these 5 types of innovation. And remember the rule of thumb. You want to change the world, 5 or more types of innovation in all 3 colors. So 2 in the way they're configuring the business, 1 in the actual offering, and 2 in the actual experience. 5 types of innovation distinctively used. Now, I was privileged to actually meet Akio Morita. How many of you in the room ever met this great man? Anybody? A few of you. That's great to see. When I met him, he was extraordinary. He did all kinds of things that most people do not do. He would bump into me, and he would invade my space, and he'd say, well, what do you think about this? Would you use this? What about the button here? Is the button in the right place? And he had cargo pants before anybody in the world wore cargo pants, and they were all filled with prototypes. This is one of my favorite things about Akio Morita. What he did was he understood how important it is to watch people and to see what they actually liked. Now, what's important about him as a business leader is that caused him to do things like say, people want to listen to good music wherever they are, not sitting in a room in the exact chair with the speakers in the perfect position. He said, how can I have great stereo and bring it with me? And that was the way he created the Walkman over the objections of most of his engineers, which created this extraordinary array of miniaturized devices. This was so important that on May 10th of 1971, and you should all celebrate this, everybody in America was afraid of this guy. Okay? It was a great time of leadership. How to cope with Japan's business invasion. Good golly. Shouldn't you be proud of that? Now here's what's interesting. Sony became, over time, a $61 billion behemoth, not so much from the Walkman. It over-focused on miniaturization for too many years. The thing that really caused it to succeed was PlayStation, about which more later. This is also characteristic of modern innovation in Japan. Hitachi is creating this brilliant new generation of nuclear reactor, designed to be very tiny so it can replace every coal plant in the world, and to be able to use 90% of the uranium ore rather than about 4%, which is what today's nuclear reactors do, which means there's effectively no waste. There's so little waste, you can store it forever on the site. Now, Hitachi is doing the brilliant engineering, but their partner is General Electric, and it's important to understand what General Electric is doing. It's managing the software. The software that creates entirely different ways to generate, distribute, and manage energy in regions, for governments, for companies, for cities. And the thing that's interesting about that is that the hard problems, the engineering problems that Hitachi is solving are sort of less valuable than the part that GE has kept for itself. The part that just alone, this software, should allow them to generate another $93 or $94 billion a year in revenues if they get it to succeed. Very important way to understand the different choices that Japan focuses on, heavy engineering, versus what the rest of the world is trying to do, software, systems, rapid pace of change. Here's another company you should all be enormously proud of. Uniqlo is a terrific organization that epitomizes the Japanese ideals of simple, functional, affordable style, right? And they've created beautiful retail spaces with lots and lots of beautiful kinds of things that people can choose to wear. And looking at it in terms of strategy, what they've discovered is that they have very affordable, highly functional clothes, much more affordable than the competitors that they're focused against. That's a classic way to win in business. Good quality, cheaper than your competitors. And that's allowed them to have extraordinary growth all over the world. Very exciting for people here locally. And they're using 4 types of innovation. 4, remember the rule of thumb, 5 is what creates a breakthrough. So you can all be enormously proud of Uniqlo, but I want to take the last moment that I've got to say that the world is really about fostering transformation. When you look at the comparative growth rates of Amazon, which has dwarfed every other company in history in terms of growth rates compared to Uniqlo, it's easy to see that Uniqlo is a great and inspiring firm, but it's still missing the opportunity to create a completely different rate of growth and a completely different form of growth. And the way you can make sure you don't make that same mental error is to understand that we live in a time of Lego building bricks. Whatever you can imagine, it can be built with pre-existing capabilities. And when you do that right, you will create a beautiful coral reef, the kind of capability that brings the whole world together, including partners and suppliers and customers, and creates things that nobody has to try to control personally. Think about a coral reef for a moment. In a coral reef, tens of thousands of different diverse life forms come together, and they work in harmony. They learn how to get balance, and nobody has to have a staff meeting on Monday mornings to control it. Okay? That's what's so important about modern life and the way it is interconnected, the way it becomes valuable, and the way it becomes transformational. Some of you have signed up for the workshops today and tomorrow. We'll all go deeper into these methods, and I would be happy to see you there and answer whatever questions you have. In the meantime, I want you to know that you can go to clientweb.doblin.com. It will ask you for an event code, SU space, Japan space, innovation. Will get you these slides. Beyond that, I want to reiterate that it is always a privilege to come to this great place in the world and to have a sense that the future for Japan, a future of very rapid change, is as bright and even more impressive than your distinguished history of innovation, engineering, and design excellence. When you learn to innovate in the right ways about the boldest ideas, you can dramatically change the rate of change in Japan and dramatically improve your probability of having rapidly growing, enormously important global enterprises. Thank you very much.
Whatever.